Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm curious, how many of you have ever been caught completely off guard by a major change in your life or maybe in your organization?
That is a lot of hands, but I'm willing to bet those of you who didn't raise your hands have still had moments where you wish you'd seen something coming.
Exactly. In today's rapidly changing world, organizations are especially facing these unprecedented levels of uncertainty. The pandemic, AI, climate change, these aren't just buzzwords, but actual transformative forces that are reshaping how we work and how we live.
And that's what brings us here today. We're going to talk about something called Foresight Readiness, an organization's ability to anticipate and prepare for future challenges and opportunities. Because foresight is not about predicting the future.
If only we could.
It's about building the capacity to see change coming, make sense of it, and respond effectively before it becomes a reality. And so our reality over the past few years has been studying strategic foresight. And the more we learn, the more we asked, how come we haven't seen this in our own industries? I work in architecture and design, where it's critical to be able to anticipate and understand change in order to build resilient environments. Build spaces that respond to climate volatility, advances or innovations in building materials, AI, or even an economic crisis.
We realized there was probably a reason we weren't seeing more about this in our everyday lives. Either people didn't know about it, or maybe they just didn't understand. I work in advertising where we focus a lot on the needs of a consumer right now. But a good brand, really a good company, is anticipating the potential future needs of their customer over the course of their lifetime. And so we've spent the last year researching how organizations navigate this and other types of uncertainties. And today we're going to share some insights exploring foresight readiness through 3 powerful lenses.
We call these lenses the learning lens, the change management lens, and the marketing lens. And together, they create a powerful framework for building foresight-ready organizations.
The first lens is learning. Think about it. How can an organization prepare for a future it doesn't understand? Learning sets the foundation for foresight readiness.
How so?
So when we think about foresight and learning traditionally focuses on the past, what's worked before, best practices, and even historical data. But foresight readiness uses what researchers call anticipatory learning, or the ability to learn from futures that haven't happened yet. And
I'm wondering if anyone in the crowd thought that that sounded a little bit contradictory. How do you learn from something that hasn't already happened?
So it's through what researchers call futures literacy. So the ability to imagine multiple different ways that the future could go, and then integrate these possibilities into decision making. Think like a choose your own adventure. So I've done a lot of work with the automotive industry, and we see this type of anticipation in cars. We don't just see gas cars on the road. We see electric cars, hybrid cars, and a lot of manufacturers are now starting to put out hydrogen-based vehicles. And what this shows us is that lots of different ways that the future of mobility might go. And organizations with strong futures literacy encourage people to question assumptions, to look at emerging trends, and to experiment with decision-making models. And one practitioner even suggested that futures literacy might start with smaller changes, like language. When employees start to say more things like, what if? Or in this future scenario where? In their everyday conversations.
So it's about building a culture to encourage people to think beyond the immediate horizon.
It is, but it also requires psychologically safe environments where people feel comfortable questioning assumptions and exploring future worlds, like, what if we made a car that ran on candy canes? Without fear of failure, because without that psychological safety, foresight efforts often stall or stop altogether, because people fear being judged or being wrong for their thoughts about the future.
And that brings us to our second lens, change management. So while some organizations may be able to see change coming, they might still struggle to adapt to it. In our research, we identified several systemic barriers to organizational change, a pivotal one and major one being leadership resistance. In a recent survey, it showed that 90% of leaders actually believe in data-driven strategies, yet only 30% of them were translating that data into actionable insights.
That's a significant disconnect.
It is, and surprisingly, of those leaders, it was the middle managers that were the most resistant group to change. And this is what creates the bottleneck, as those middle managers are meant to translate this high-level visioning, this high-level idea into operational realities.
And why do we think that happens?
While middle managers are caught between this executive visioning and the practical implementation of that vision, and they bear the brunt of these change initiatives that they don't always have the opportunity to design or have any input into those initiatives. As a design strategist, I facilitate a lot of executive visioning. At the beginning of each project, we sit down and we talk about the future vision of the organization and how might the design, add to that. We set out some design objectives. But often, this conversation about the future vision doesn't extend beyond the walls of that executive meeting. And those important voices, the ones that will drive that vision forward into operations, are left out. And so, fortunately, there are change management models that offer a very structured approach to breaking down some of these barriers, such as evaluating leadership style, organizational culture, that middle management predisposition, and even develop communication strategies.
Right, which brings us to our third and final lens, which is looking at how foresight is positioned and communicated across an organization. And this is where marketing principles bear a surprising amount of relevance.
How do they do that?
So foresight practitioners often struggle to articulate the value of their work. Using the term foresight isn't always helpful because it's not something people are familiar with. So instead, successful practitioners are framing their work using language like strategic adaptability or resilience, which resonates more strongly with business leaders. Just like in advertising, we're often tailoring our message to who we want to talk to and where and when they might see that message.
So it's speaking the language of the organization.
Exactly. Tailoring the message according to what the organization might be looking for, because they engage with foresight for different reasons, just like Sabrina and I might have different reasons for making a purchase. Some organizations are really just looking for provocation. They want to challenge their thinking, but others are looking for that more practical strategy. So tailoring the message, whether it be about innovation or risk mitigation, dramatically improves adoption.
And I've heard storytelling is a really good tool in communicating some really complex ideas about the future.
It is. And one practitioner actually went so far as to suggest that data should take a back seat to storytelling and let that storytelling really take center stage. Narrative is compelling regardless of industry. So when we come up with resistance like foresight sounds way too vague or we don't have time for this type of long-term thinking, a powerful story about a potential future world or an analogy that relates back to everyday life makes these abstract concepts feel a lot more tangible.
And so what can organizations do today to be more foresight ready?
So first, create psychological safety, fostering environments where employees feel comfortable exploring different futures, like cars that run on candy canes, without that fear of failure. And that means rewarding thoughtful experimentation, even if the results aren't immediately profitable.
And second, rather than treating foresight as a separate activity, integrate it into your existing processes or develop internal champions at all levels. Because foresight doesn't only belong to executives or senior leadership, it's a mindset that should be carried throughout the entire organization. And so organizations with designated foresight roles at all levels, or that integrate futures thinking into their strategic planning, their product development, or even performance reviews, will see much higher adoption rates.
And lastly, start small. One practitioner suggested low barrier activities like horizon scanning, which allows employees to build their confidence and practice while building this momentum. So foresight really isn't a static condition, but it's a dynamic capability that needs to be cultivated.
And the organizations that thrive in uncertainty aren't always the ones with the most resources or the most detailed plans.
No, they're the ones that learn from emerging futures, that navigate change successfully, and that communicate the value of foresight throughout their culture.
And as foresight practitioners, our role is not just to provide insights about futures, but to build the conditions in which futures thinking can flourish within organizations.
So we invite you to consider, how might you foster foresight readiness within your own organization? And what small changes could you make tomorrow so that the next time a big change comes your way, you feel just a little more prepared?
Because the future belongs to those who prepare for it today. Thank you.